Okay, so let's talk some Las Vegas and the NASCAR Cup Series. So, Truck Series is up, Xfinity Series is up, and they're just the initial thoughts, quick previews, early picks, ones to watch. We will be putting out another video after these kind of initial thoughts, preview videos, but I wanted to get something out there before the weekend rolls around, some stuff that we're keeping in mind, some things that we're looking for, some things we're watching out for, um, just things that we're keeping in mind as we're building lines and as we are watching practice and qualifying. So they are headed to Las Vegas. If you're not familiar, Las Vegas is a 1.5 intermediate cookie cutter oval. It's 267 laps, so it's, as always, it's more laps in the Truck Series, it's more laps in the Xfinity Series. So there is more Dominator points up for grabs. As we saw in Daytona, as we saw last week, even as we saw in testing, like a flat tire with the next gen car is detrimental. It can completely end your day, take you out of the race. You can be stuck in the mud, lose multiple laps. It happened to Christopher Bell last week. He spun out, didn't really necessarily damage the car too bad, but was stuck and couldn't move and had to wait for a flatbed to literally come pick him up, drive him back to pit road, unload him so the car could then put tires on it. Because you can't move. And if you did move, you're then damaging the diffuser and then your car is going to be messed up. So it's not really anything you can do to, as a DFS player, to, get around that. Just if your guy spins out and doesn't hit anything, you better hope he at least has one tire that isn't flat on that car. Otherwise, his day is done. So that was one thing we did not like seeing with the next gen car, but there was a lot of things that we did like seeing. One of those things was there's a ton of off throttle time. So what does that mean? You're not just stuck full throttle going around the entire track. It's not all aero dependent. It's not all about equipment anymore. Even still, equipment is important, but there's more of an emphasis on the driver. Again, you have to be, these cars are hard to drive, which is good. So because of that, the driver has a lot more control, a lot more influence, a lot more impact in the performance of, maybe that team or where that car is running. So like Tyler Reddick, for example, he's a great wheelman. And we saw that last week at Auto Club. Probably should have won that race if he didn't have that flat tire issue. And then Byron just couldn't get the car, slowed down in time and just slammed into him. And, both ended their days, which was kind of, it's unfortunate because, we were high on Reddick and had a good amount of him. So him being wrecked out was not fun. One thing that Kevin and I were just talking about is like, what do you look at with this next gen car? Are you looking at track history? Are you looking at practice? Are you looking at qualifying? Are you looking at, the pit road stuff? Are you looking at, who the crew chief is, or like what are you looking at to try to get an edge, to try to get an advantage? And there's still a lot of unknowns. There's still a lot that we're learning. And that's another thing I put on here. So we're still learning. We're trying to figure out what is the best way to go. What data should we really be looking at? And we'll tell you, like, we're still trying to figure it out ourselves. So we're in the same boat as most of you guys. But for us, I think it's focusing on guys who are talented, have good equipment, have that potential to pick up fast laps, get out front, lead you some laps. One thing that was a little concerning to me is, especially with the West Coast swing, there isn't a lot you can really change on the West Coast until you kind of get done with the West Coast. So a lot of these cars have been prepped ahead of time. It's really difficult because all the teams are, for the most part, in like the greater Charlotte, North Carolina area. So having them fly all the way out to the West Coast and, truck all their cars out, it's tough for them to make adjustments, especially on a short basis. So saw JGR as a whole not run great last week. Saw a lot of overheating issues, just some mechanical issues, just, a lot of drivers not really happy with their car. So I'm curious to see if that's going to continue or not into this weekend. Another thing that Kev was talking about a lot before we hopped on here is, as you look at the value of, some of these drivers, we got a ton of value last week out of like the 8K range, out of the 9K range. We didn't really see a ton of value. Yeah, Kyle Larson won the race, but you didn't lead a ton of laps. He didn't dominate. Like he didn't pick up a bunch of fast laps. Like even drivers like Eric Jones, who was like in a 6K range, and there's a couple other pretty cheap guys. Like they were out front, with good speed. So there's a lot of value on this slate. So I know there's a lot of blue on this slate because it's tough to give out those early picks. But are there any guys, Kev, that you I guess feel strongly about, or you think will have good speed kind of coming into the weekend?
I can't necessarily say there's one guy I'm higher on than the others because, as we've kind of mentioned, kind of seems like anyone in this like 11K Larson range all the way down to like his 8K Austin Dillon range. You could foresee a situation just based off their skill level, talent, whatever, where depending on where they qualify, they could get out there lead laps. I mean, we saw it last week. Who would have thought Eric Jones would have been one of those dominant cars last week? He didn't lead the laps like Reddick did, but he was running top 5 the whole race, and he finished up there. I mean, we barely saw him up there at all last year. We know he's a talented driver and everything. So obviously, he's not a great equipment now. And we saw him up there last week. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint one of these guys, and even some of these guys in this 7K range like Chastain, Almirola, Ricky Stenhouse killed it last week. Obviously, Eric Jones is in there. Even like someone like Busher down in the 6A range. We know he was wheeling the car last year, surprising us. So he has that talent. And now we have this car that's like this great equalizer. You can see him potentially maybe leading laps. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint one driver this week. Obviously, probably some practice qualifying will help us. But I think kind of the approach I might have this week is, we saw last week a lot of these 10K drivers didn't pay off. If Larson didn't win that race, none of the 10K drivers and above would have paid off. So maybe more of like a shotgun approach and kind of instead of trying to stack this like kind of 10, fit in 2 of these 10, 11K drivers or these 9K drivers, and then a couple value plays, maybe a punt or two. Like probably going to try to be a little bit more spread out across the board this week. It's kind of where I'm leaning, and hope play on that talent, look at the practice qualifying data, and then hopefully based off this week, since we finally had, quote unquote real track last week where it's not a lot of luck like Daytona is, maybe next week we'll definitely be able to go into this with a little bit more kind of idea of how the season's going to go with, as the data starts to kind of stack up on these tracks that require a little bit of setup and driver skill and what have you.
Yeah, we've been to just all these different track types this year. We've been to, the super speedways. We went to the LA Coliseum, which was, kind of the short track. I went to Auto Club, large, real fast, worn out 2-mile track. Now we're kind of at a cookie cutter. So, 1.5 intermediate track. So it's a lot of variety. It's a lot of different, skill sets, a lot of different track types. So we're learning a lot, and it will be really helpful as we continue, throughout the season to go back and reference a lot of these races. And these teams are going to continue to improve. The speeds are going to continue to get better. The mechanical issues are slowly going to start, decreasing and going away. But, some guys that stick out to me, and I think I like the approach that Kev was talking about too. Maybe instead of having that stars and scrubs type of lineup or jamming in, 2 or 3 11K guys and then hitting the 7 and 6K range, it's more of, having a pretty balanced lineup. Like I can see, like Kev was saying, Austin Dillon all the way up to Larson. Like you can make an argument for any of those guys. I think getting out front and, leading some laps or even picking up some fast laps. So I think for me, it's if I can build a majority of my line with guys who I think have the potential to finish on the lead lap, maybe earn some place differential, but more or less, I just want to play, ideally, hopefully 6 guys that all finish on the lead lap, and I'll get top, ideally 15 finishes, 15th place or higher. And as you get lower, it gets kind of tough with, some of the punt plays, but any of these guys have a good chance of leading, especially if like we were really high on Kyle Busch last week, and fortunately, he got in issues, but a lot of people were really high on him. So, he didn't show up and, he got in issues. So maybe if the industry is like, oh my gosh, everyone needs to play Chase Elliott this week, like it's not a for sure thing that he's going to get out there and lead and dominate. So with so many unknowns and uncertainties with this car. It might not be a bad idea to, especially early on, just take a different approach. Try different drivers, try different lineup constructions, because we're all learning at the same time. We're all kind of going through it and trying to figure it out. So I think the Cup Series is probably my most interesting slate this weekend. It's, the Truck Series, you got Kyle Busch in it. The Xfinity Series, I think the Stars and Scrubs approach is kind of the way to go. But when you get to the Cup Series, I mean, there's so many different ways you can go. I'm really excited as a fan to watch. And I'm also kind of curious from a DFS standpoint to kind of figure out, like, what lineup construction is really going to make the most sense, and seeing if the cars that were fast last week are then going to be fast again this week. And hopefully we'll get some of those answers in practice and qualifying. But yeah, it's kind of like initial preview. I know it's not necessarily the picks, but we will have a final picks video for Cup that'll be up on YouTube. Also post the spreadsheet as well. It's at Fast Cars FM. And then real quickly, just want to say thank you. I know our goal was to try to get to like 285, 300-ish subscribers last weekend, and we hit that, thanks to your help. So, if you're still watching us, if you weren't sure about us, if we helped you in any way, hitting the subscribe button or liking and sharing our content is all we really ask for at this moment. So, anything else, Kev, you want to add about the Cup Series?
There's just one more quick thing I'll add is, I wouldn't be afraid if your line looks a little different or you have some kind of goofier drivers in there compared to last year, because, it's kind of all up in the air. It's a new car. It really changes up everything. So I wouldn't be afraid if your stuff looks a little bit different than you're used to, and just roll with it and let's see what happens. Let's win some money this week.
Yeah, still learning, and yeah, it should be a fun, telling weekend, and hopefully we'll learn a lot. We'll get a lot of good information, and like I said, we'll post the final picks video once qualifying is done. Good luck, everybody.